Okay, and in this session, we're going to be talking about using iClicker, which is polling software, which on our campus, we have a site license for, where it costs the campus about $4 per student per semester for anyone who uses it. And so far, our campus technology services have been paying for that. Before that, students had to pay for it themselves, and they paid dramatically more than that per student. By having the site license, it's made it much more, well, it certainly made it much more affordable for students, but it's also much less costly per student. So what we're going to do actually is have people try iClicker to see what its capabilities are. And so what I'm going to ask everyone to do is to join iClicker Cloud as a student. And Nancy, are you from Oswego?
Sorry, I'm eating lunch while we're here.
Oh, that's okay.
No, I actually am not. And it's interesting that you said that. I'm from Rockland Community College. So because you said that, I know that they frequently share with us different platforms that, teachers can use in the classroom. So I'm going to just email my tech person to find out if we have access to this. I've certainly heard of it, but I didn't realize that you would need a campus account. So I'm going to.
Well, you don't need one. And in fact, for probably about a decade or so, I was having students buy their own license. I was using open source textbooks anyway, so the only cost for students was a license for this. And they could either buy a physical clicker back when I first started using it, or a mobile device, which is what they were all moving towards. And the mobile app was costing them, I think, about $15 for a year or something like that. So
Right.
it was the only cost for the course, but it costs less per student when the campus has a license. But the reason I asked is we're going to be using iClicker, and it would be easiest if you create an account, but you can create an instructor account for free, I believe. But for a student account, you do have to pay for it. However, when you first use it, if this is your first time trying it, you get 2 weeks of free access. So anyone can sign up for an account just to test it. So you don't have to do that, but I'd encourage you to do it just so you can see what the experience is like. But if you do try it, it means you will use up that initial free trial period, basically. So what you do in any case is, if you'd like to try it, is you go to this address, and I should probably put this address in chat. And to do that, I'm going to have to hop out for a second. And I'll put that right in there. And this should take you into there where you create an account. It's the usual type of account creation. But the reason why I'm asking if you're an Oswego faculty member, by doing this, you can get not only a free instructor account, but once you have an instructor account, there's no charge to the campus of having the student account for instructors with a student account in the Oswego domain, and you use the same login. So I put the link in there, and then if you'd like to try it, just go there and then and you can create a free account. We're just getting started.
Yes, my Zoom link didn't work. I had to come over there.
Oh, okay. Oh, are there network problems again?
Yeah, it's just says the passcode is incorrect. I don't know why.
Okay, sorry about that. I hope, I wonder if other people are, because we had more people signed up for it. Let me just check to see. Yeah, we had 14 people signed up for this. I wonder if other people are having that problem. Oh no, that was a different session. Sorry.
Okay, I don't know. I was in my office and had to come over here.
Yeah, sorry about that. Was it was asking for a passcode or?
Yeah. Like,
I don't know. It's possible I messed up, but were you both able to get in by clicking on the link in the calendar or the schedule?
That's how I got in. I just clicked on the Zoom link.
Okay.
mine opens it in a browser. It's not.
Oh, you have to have Zoom installed. Otherwise, it will ask for a passcode.
Okay,
But if you install Zoom on your computer, it will come in and the passcode is stored in the URL. So that's why. With the browser, it will sometimes ask, depending on the browser, for the passcode. Not always, but sometimes.
okay.
I think, because I've seen that also on mobile devices too, if you don't have Zoom.
All right.
But if you choose to open in Zoom, they should just bring you right in. So going forward, that may be worth trying.
Yeah.
So what we're asking people to do is to create an account, and the address is right there, join iClicker.com and then /QYBR, because we're going to just experiment with it just to show how iClicker works in general.
So John, I'm sorry, I just, I now that I realize what, it is, because I just had looked at the agenda today and thought maybe it was a platform, that I might be able to use at no cost, but
Okay.
now that you've explained it, I'm not sure if it's something that is going to be relevant for my classes or my campus right now. So I'm going to jump off this meeting. I just didn't want to,
Okay.
I didn't want to do that without explaining to you why, but I appreciate you running the program and thank you for introducing me.
Okay, no problem. Sorry about that. Although,
thank
yeah, a lot of the things you can do with this, you can also do with free polling apps. One is Socrative, will let you have, I think, up to 30 students, maybe 50 students with a free account. And then if you have more than that, you have to pay for it.
Right.
So there's a number of other tools out there that'll do the same thing at no cost.
Yes,
But
well, I appreciate
okay.
it. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay.
Okay, so Carolyn, were you able
Yeah.
to?
So I put the link in that you put in the chat, and I put in my Sligo email, did a password, and I agreed to privacy notice. It says create an account. It's like grayed
Right.
out. We can't go any further.
It should have given you the option of.
I mean, it says student ID recommended. It's not required, so I didn't put anything in that one. And for some reason now, I mean, I know I'm still in this meeting, but I'm not seeing the usual screen with the chat box and
Maybe that's underneath the browser. If you
yeah,
click on the little blue circle at the bottom of your
yeah,
taskbar, that
Yeah.
should bring up Zoom.
yeah, I see there's two things, and one just is getting started. It's the page I'm on, and then the other one is just a blue box of Zoom, and it says join a meeting. I'm already in it. I don't know where it went.
Well, if you click join a meeting again, it should bring you back into it and bring the focus back to that. It's probably underneath your other things.
Yeah, I'm gonna go through some of the other ones.
No?
Yeah, oh, it's not there. Well, I will maybe just try to get back out and maybe hit back. Let's try that one. Nope. Either way, so my clicker set up here. I went to the SUNY Oswego page as you were talking, and the iClicker website. I was going to sign in that way, and then you put the one in the box. So I was trying that one. I'm going to say create an account just is not.
Yeah, creating an account, if normally you would create an instructor account, and then I don't think it shouldn't ask you for an ID for an instructor account. And then
Right.
once you create the instructor account, you can go back in and log in as a student with the same email address, with your Oswego email address and with that password. You might have to create a student account. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've had to do that.
Right, well, I was downloading, it told me to download the app for Windows the other way.
Right.
So I didn't finish doing that.
Well, that's actually so you can use iClicker. You don't
Yeah.
need to do that from the student side.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, I'm not able to get in with what you sent in the thing, so I'm not sure.
huh,
But I am back to the Zoom meeting. I
okay.
got in there.
Yeah, I actually created an account and it just opened this.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the instructor account, right? Okay, so then what you can do is go back and log in with your same email address and this, but choose the student side.
Okay.
Because I'm going to be demonstrating it so you can see what the experience is like from the student side, and I'll be running the instructor side here. I put together just a group just for the purpose of workshops. I've been doing that every semester for a while now.
Okay, so should I just log out or I don't see anything like
Yeah, you can exit out from there and then log back in, but then when you go to iClicker Cloud, iClicker.com, choose logging in as a student, or you could go to that link and it should bring you in as a student, but it'll ask you whether you're logging in as a student or an instructor. The second time, choose student
Okay, so I should close my browsers to get out of.
or a new tab, either, yeah. And I'm not sure why, it wasn't working, Carolyn.
I mean, I just copy and pasted it into my browser. I'm gonna try it again.
Okay, so I use
While
the
you're
same
going
login
through it.
password. And
Yes,
now,
except now do it as a student.
okay.
And I don't remember if it asked you to create a student account or not.
It just, yeah.
It just brings
it's
you right
already
in.
That says iClicker student.
Okay, good. And then just log in with your username and password, and that should do it, I think.
So John, I'm redoing this. I have to select create an account, correct?
Yes. And first create the instructor account.
Well, it's not, I'm not getting it. I have first name, last name, SUNY Oswego email, confirm email, student ID and password. I don't have a choice for
Oh, the ID would be your email address, I think.
the student ID versus,
It shouldn't, it never asked me for one. Let me just try it myself.
I mean, the other person on here just got through it fine. I could share my screen, I don't know.
Yeah, actually, why don't we try that and let's see if we can get this figured out. Let me stop my share.
Um,
Now, was this as an instructor?
I just clicked the link in your chat and pasted it.
Oh, okay. You first have to create the instructor account. That's why you're trying to, with a student, it's going to ask you for your student ID number. But go back, click on the back button in the browser. A couple of times. Or maybe not. It's probably,
Yeah.
it's okay. Do this. Just type in iClicker.com. Okay, and now,
Yeah, this is where I was starting when you were talking.
and now first create the free instructor account.
All right, I'll work through this while you're,
And then once you do that, yeah, put in, well, actually, let's go through it because this will be things people will be doing. Type in Oswego. And then choose SUNY College at Oswego. And then you put in information about what class, what discipline you're in, your role and so forth. And once you create that account, that's what you'd actually use to run it from the classroom. You only have to do this once.
oh, right, instructor remote ID. I
And
don't-
now that's only if you're using a physical clicker. There are things that look like this. Very few people use those anymore. So
Oh,
leave that
okay.
optional. Agree. Yeah, you got to agree and then create account. And now, yeah, it's up to you. I usually just add it, so I don't have to remember it, but although when you go to a classroom, you do have to remember it, so never mind. So you could just close that out because we're going to be going through the rest of it.
Okay, so
Now you could try clicking that link from before.
okay, let's see if I can still paste it here.
And yeah, there it is. And now, there you go. So now you would, I don't know, did you have to create a student account?
I created using this website. Here I click on create an account.
Okay, so yeah, you do have to create the student account.
Okay, my stuff is covering that. That's what the left box is.
Oh, wait, yeah,
kind of.
yeah. Okay, Well, try just logging, let's go back a
Yeah.
step. See if you could
Yeah.
just log in with your instructor account, because this is a part I'm not sure about, because, yeah, try that. And if this doesn't work, you may have to create a student account. And at one point I did, but then let's just try that.
Hey. Seem to be there.
Okay, now you're in class. Okay, this is what it would look like for a student. There's also a mobile app version of it. Okay, so now let's go through and actually try it.
Want me to stop sharing my screen now?
Yeah, you've got 2 recorded absences, probably because I did use the same thing for, yeah, you can stop share.
I have to figure out where do maybe stop? I don't know. I gotta stop share. There we go.
Right, stop the share. Okay, and I'm going to show what will happen to get this all started. Well, I'll show it what it looks like from the instructor side. So I am going to go in, and iClicker is set up in, well, let me make sure I share the right screen. So I'm going to share, and let me share this screen because that's the one I'll actually be running it on. And when you go into a classroom, what would happen is you just go, there'd be a little iClicker icon on the desktop of the computer, but I don't have it on here. So I'm going to go down to iClicker and set it up. The way it's set up on campus is because it's only designed for a single user, it actually does a really quick install on the desktop. It just takes about 3 to 5 seconds to do it. I already installed that. So apparently it didn't update the icon.
So it's already on the computer.
It's already, the current version should be on this. Well, if it's on your computer, you may have to do an update. I just did this a few minutes ago because I only use this computer for once a year. Let me just make sure. Let me just go to the downloads and see what happened. There is version 6. Oh, but that's actually not. Come on. Extract all. I did this before. I'm not sure why it's asking me to do it again. But this should be done automatically in the classrooms. I'll make sure they update to the new version. The version that I had on here was from last fall. Skip these files because I had just installed it, so I don't know why it's doing this again. Sometimes things go wrong. Okay, so I'm going to now start iClicker. This is what would happen on a Podium computer. It would come in, you would then log in with your account, and you do this right before the class starts.
Sorry, is this the screen that you're sharing?
Oh, you know what? Yeah. Let me. I normally do it the other way, and
Okay.
oh no, it's not there. Let me. So what would happen if you would see? Oh, how do? Let me. You know what? Let me just flip my screen share around because I was sharing it to Zoom, but not. I got out of practice with this. So stop the share. And one more time, I'm going to try sharing it correctly this time. So that way everyone can see it both here and remotely. And there. Okay. So when you come in, you would first sign in. I'm already signed in, but basically it would, let me just sign out. When you come in, you would first see something that would look like, come on, iClicker. You would see it's on the other screen. It's not being cooperative that way. So you would see something like this. You would start in class by putting in your email. Sorry for the, I wasn't expecting these issues. I was just expecting network issues. So you type in your email, and the password you just created. If it's on your own computer, you could remember it, so you don't have to do it. But in the Podium, you can't do that because it gets reinstalled each time and cleared. Because otherwise, everyone will be logged into one account in there. Oh, because I use a different. I got so many passwords. This time I'll type in the correct one. There we go. And now the only class I have active is just this test one I put together for today, which is actually the one that you've already joined. So this is a join code if you wanted to share it with students, and that's basically what I shared with you before. Okay, so we're going to start the class, and what will happen is it's going to pop up something like this. It popped it up on the other screen that looks like this, and that's what will hang out on top of whatever you're doing. If you're doing a slide presentation, this just sits on top. You can move it around. You can make it smaller. You can, you know, and
Okay, John, all I'm seeing is like your files, windows and stuff.
Okay, apparently I didn't share the right screen again. I thought I did.
I think it's just me that's here, from what I can tell.
Well,
right?
I know, but what you're seeing is what's being recorded. So I'm going to
Well,
stop
maybe-
the share and make sure that I'm sharing the right version this time. So I thought I had it right, but it's one of those days. So I'm sharing screen 2, and now you should see.
There we go.
Okay. And what happens is this is the actual thing that will hang out that you'll be using. Depending on the resolution of the screen, this is low res, it's an old computer. It could be smaller than that, and you can change the size, but in the settings. But this is what you'd normally be doing. And now I'm going to go back to the slides, and this is basically the type of thing that people would typically be doing. You would be embedding questions within your presentation, and this would be just hanging out somewhere outside, out of the way, and you can move it wherever you want. Again, by clicking on this, you can make it smaller, so you only have the circle, and you just expand it when you want to. So now we're going to actually let you try it from a student. Well, we're going to try it first. What are concerns about the spring semester? And what we're going to do here is just illustrate the different types of questions that can be used. So we're going to do a poll, but the type of poll question that we're going to do is a short answer. So this will accept numeric responses or multiple choice or etc. And here it's asking me which display would be used. And what it would do is it should put the question up on your device. If it's on a mobile app, students would see the questions right there. If on a web browser, they'd see it right in there. So, so if you want to type in whatever you'd like, it doesn't matter what you type in, but we'll see the number of people, and it shows right here the number of responses.
Should I join the class?
So yeah, join the class now.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, both join the class. And this is something you tell students to do. Make sure you join right before you get started with everything else.
Right, so I haven't joined, have I?
I can't tell. So if you try joining the class, that would be just that link that I had sent before.
Go into that. Oh, so I need to go. Okay.
And I think you had it
Well,
up
yeah, I
before.
mean, okay, your instructor started. Okay, now I can do.
Okay.
Okay. So that screen before it said test at the top, I had to actually say join.
Right. Yeah, so then yeah. And students would just go into the mobile app typically, and they just join the class at the beginning and just keep it open throughout the class.
Okay, I said.
Or if they're using a laptop, they could have two a separate tab for it. And you notice we got one response there. So you can track the responses as they come in. And if you have two monitors, you could put the results on the other screen and watch them as they come in.
Can you, I guess you probably can't, you can only have one device working at a time in the classroom. You can't have the projector and the computer screen.
You can. Well, you could if it's set up correctly. The classrooms I teach in, Lanigan 101 in a classroom in Mahar, I do have a second monitor. So that way the projection is the same as what I see. The problem is if you could set it up so that you use the monitor, but then you'd have to be facing the screen to see what's happening on the screen. So it really helps if there's two screens in the room. One where you would have the material that's projected, so you're seeing the same thing as students are, but another one where you store the other stuff.
Could that be an iPad?
It could be, and that's something that many people have used, doing it on an iPad, because you can run it from an iPad. Or an iPhone, for that matter. Or you can display the results here. So I'm going to stop the poll. We've got two responses. And now we can display them. And there we go. So we've got 2 responses. And if you have 300 students, you'd see the whole set of things. And if you have 200 or 300 students, you could always do a word cloud to see what, there's not, with 2 people and, no overlapping words, you're not going to see it. But if you have a few hundred responses, you can see which things came up most often and all that. So it's a nice way of getting a visualization of something. Some people do it, just start the class asking how the students are doing or something like that, or use one word or a few words to describe your mood for the day, etc. I generally don't do that, but you could. Or you could ask students what concerns they have about the class at the start of a class, or you could ask them what concepts they had difficulty with when they were working through problems, or what concepts they'd like to spend more time on in class. And then you could do a word cloud in a larger class to get to see those responses. Okay, so that's one type of question where you can just get qualitative, or you can have students write in short answers. And since we got off to a slow start, you could do the same thing to ask how you might use polling as short answers, but let's get to some of the others. So now here, this is a multiple choice question. And basically any questions you'd put in whatever you're displaying. We had one faculty member who didn't use PowerPoint or Google Slides or anything else. Instead, he just wrote it on Notepad and put it on the screen. What will happen is it will take an image of the screen of whatever's there and use that for the question. And when you go to grade the work, if you choose to grade it, you will see the questions, which is a screen grab, and the students see it on their device, whatever is on the screen at the time. So we're going to do here a multiple choice question select all that replies. So that would be a multiple answer. That's multiple responses are allowed. So we're going to start the polling, and there we go. And you can pick you could choose multiple responses and so on. And you have the option of doing a count up as we're doing and then terminating the poll manually. Or in a large class, I normally use a countdown where I'll give students the first day, a few days, and a minute and 30 seconds. Then after a few days, it may drop down to a minute and a quarter, and then sometimes down to a minute if they're pretty good at connecting. Sometimes it takes them a little while to get connected to the network, especially if they went off into another tab and their network connection drops, which sometimes happens. So we've got 2 responses that came in.
Oh, you want a response? You want a quick response?
Yeah, if you could just.
Okay. Sorry.
It doesn't matter what the answers are, but just to show what it looks like from a student perspective. Okay, so we'll stop the polling and then we can look at the results. And again, normally what I would do is I would have this window, it's going to make a copy of that, and I will drag that to the other screen so I can see in real time how they're answering. Because often we'll talk about that in a bit, but often what I want to do is I want to ask people questions the first time themselves if it's a problem that they have to answer. And then if a lot of them are struggling with it, have them talk to their peers and then discuss it. And then we'll do the same question again, but I don't want them to see how people voted the first time while they're doing the discussion, and I'll tell them to try to find someone with a different answer and then discuss it with them to see, if listen to their explanation and then to try to convince them that your explanation is better. And then we'll give them a few minutes for that. And you can generally tell how the discussion's going by just kind of listening in and listening to the noise levels. And then we'll vote again. And so here we got 2 responses for C, 1 for B and D, and none for A and E. And I would argue that it can help address student metacognition issues or problems. And we don't have to go into it in detail, but this is partly explaining how polling might be useful. Students generally don't know very well what they know. And quite often they come in really confident about some things that they may not fully understand. And sometimes they come in being a little nervous about it, but they may understand it better than they think they do. But by doing polling where you give them problems that they have to answer, they get to see immediately whether they understand it or not. And they get some immediate feedback about any misperceptions. So you don't have to wait until that first graded assignment or that first exam. And it's not just student metacognition, it also lets us see what students understand. So we get to see whether students are doing well, whether they've mastered the things we hope they did based on readings or other work prior to that class. And also students get to see whether they're understanding or not without really any risk of embarrassment, because you only see the totals. No one else sees whether they were right or wrong. Maybe the people around them that they were arguing with get to see whether they were right or wrong. But in any case, it helps students get a better sense of what they know, what they understand and not. And the second point is, we get to know what students are understanding. If you find that 95% of the students get the question correct right away, you don't need to spend a lot of time on that concept. You can just briefly address it and then move on. But if you find that 80 or 90% of the students select an incorrect answer, then you may want to focus on that concept a bit, or you may want to go back and scaffold it, starting with a lower level question and then gradually building up to help them develop that. But it lets us use our time more effectively by not wasting time on things that everyone comes in knowing, and spending more time on those areas where students need the most assistance.
Just to clarify, I just put in one choice.
I wasn't
sampling.
I wasn't suggesting that people.
I was looking
were
for
taking both.
all of these, if there was an F that I didn't see down lower.
Oh, but see, this was one where you could choose multiple answers. So
Yeah,
you could choose
yeah.
A, B, C, D, and E,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it was a
I could've put
multiple
them all.
select.
Yeah.
But also, one thing that surprised me, and I had read about this before, I've been using clickers for about 14 or 15 years now, going back a couple of iterations with other brands. But one thing that happens is students will get distracted after a few minutes sometimes. But if students are wandering and then you give them a question like this, it brings them right back to focus, because once they commit to an answer, they want to know what the answer is. And that's a really helpful thing. And then it resets their focus, resets their attention and so forth.
How do you, so do you have students where their phones are out the whole class?
Yes.
Because of this, yeah.
Mhm.
And do you find they're doing things on there?
Well, I generally give them maybe 10 to 15 questions during an hour and 20-minute class period, and then there's some time for discussion. In my case, I'm doing pretty much a flipped class, and as a result, they watch some videos, they do some work, they work on problem sets before class, and then the questions I give them in class tend to be a bit higher level, where a good proportion of them will get it wrong, and so it keeps their attention focused on those things that are a little bit more challenging. And so if you were doing more lecturing and less of that sort of flip thing where students are working on problems, you probably wouldn't do as many of these questions. You might only do a few in a class period, or you might do a series of them at the beginning of class, or maybe a series at the end just to check understanding. But in my case, much of the time they're spent working through problems, and some of the problems might be ones that take 8 or 9 minutes or 10 minutes to work through, and then they get to check their own answers, and then they get to discuss it with other people and try to come up with better answers and so on. So in my case, they're out all the time, but they don't have to be, and you could encourage students to put their phones away when you're not using the clicker questions or when they're doing other activities. So it depends on how often you're doing this. And if you're using this pretty much all through the class period, it tends not to be as much of a distraction. So, and that is an issue. But yeah, and you can also see what students come in with. You could do, before you start discussing a concept, give them sort of a pre-test. You wouldn't have to grade it, but just check to see what their initial understanding is, or you could just check on their status, how they're doing. You can use it for exit tickets. You can use it for muddiest point things at the end of class, where you ask students to list the things that they don't quite understand, or things that they've learned in that class day, or what they want to learn more about in the next class day. And you could use a free response thing for that type of thing. And there's also a built-in exit ticket option on there that we'll see in just a couple minutes.
May I ask you a question?
Sure. Oh yeah, anytime.
Yes.
Sorry.
So can we just set up this thing on Brightspace like a quiz, and it could have like only one question maybe, and ask the students to do it during the class?
You could set up a quiz on here where they answer them all using this. But on the other hand, if they're going to be in Brightspace anyway, you could just do a quiz in Brightspace.
But I mean, sorry, my question is about Brightspace, maybe not on iClicker, but if that also has this option, if I'm just asking one question in each class, maybe I can just.
You could set it up, and you could
in
have it set up
Brightspace.
as a quiz in Brightspace where it automatically goes to the gradebook. The other thing though is these scores can be automatically integrated with the gradebook so that the grades from the questions, if there are correct answers, will automatically go into the Brightspace gradebook.
From iClicker, right?
Mhm. And so what I would do, and the way you would score this, if it's a multiple select, is you would click on each one of the ones that are correct answers, and it would automatically give students points. So in this case, it would give them 20% of the credits, the points available for this question for each correct answer they have, and it highlights it in green.
Right.
And students would see that in the grade book, if you know, but you don't you can do things anonymously. If you're doing a poll, you might want to make it anonymous, and that's an option too. So, but yeah, so you could do this for polling in class, or you could do a poll like a short quiz. You could set up a series of these that students would work through, or you could just do it in Brightspace and tell students to log in. You could make it open at the start of class and then have them all submit it within however minutes you want to allocate to it. So multiple select is one option. Another is, well, here's just, you can take a guess at this, but Eric Mazur really started the use of clickers. He's a physicist at Harvard, teaches introductory physics for non-majors as well as more advanced classes. Carl Wyman was a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, and they did some studies of this where they did some essentially randomized, well, not quite randomized controlled experiments, but they had identical classes with identical instructors. Some used clickers and some did not. And they combined that with that peer discussion methodology I talked about, where you ask students questions, you have them then discuss it and then vote again. And what they did in the case of, I think it was in the case of Eric Mazur, he used a force concept inventory, a concept test developed in physics, where it measured common misunderstandings of concepts about forces in physics. And so they compared the gain from the pretest and the post-test for students that use clickers with other classes that did not use clickers, but identical readings, identical assignments otherwise. So this is now going to be a multiple, this is a multiple choice. Only one of those is going to be correct. And just take a guess. Oops, sorry about that. Just take a guess to what the learning gains were. Okay, we've got two guesses, and let's see. Okay, one each. And in fact, neither is correct. It was actually 200 to 300%. That Eric Mazur found a tripling in student learning gains between the pre and the post test for those who had used clickers. Carl Wyman in chemistry found a doubling in that, and that was a larger experiment with others. And in the paper that summarized that, it showed the two grade distributions, and pretty much one of the distributions, the distribution with clickers, the tail of it, the lower tail of it was right in the same region as the upper tail on the other, the top 5, the bottom 5% aligned with the top 5% of the class that did not use clickers in terms of the learning gains. So, it was a pretty significant effect. And in almost every discipline where there have been studies of the effect of clickers, they do find that students tend to learn more. There's been a couple studies, mostly in humanities fields, where there was no significant learning gains, but that's really rare. In the STEM disciplines in particular, there's some really dramatic gains, mostly from the practice and the feedback that students are getting. Or that's what the research seems to show. Okay. Here's a simple one. I'm just trying to illustrate the different types of questions. Another type of question is a numeric one. So let's just try that. So suppose there's, to be optimistic, let's say 100 COVID cases the first week of the semester, and the cases rise by 10% per week. How many new cases would be expected 2 weeks later in the next week? And again, you don't have to get it right. Just you can just type something in. So, if you're teaching in a discipline where numeric answers come up, this is one way of getting it. Got one response. Okay, we've got two. And so what would happen is we click it and, okay, and I would probably give credit for both of these because it's 121% because it would be 110 after 1 week and then 110 squared, which would be 121 the other. But that would also be a 20%, 21% increase. And you notice you can make more than one answer correct in doing that, because sometimes students will write things as like 121%. Sometimes they'll write 1.21 or, or something similar. And as long as the answers are reasonable, you can give people credit. And so I'm going to close that.
How easy is it to type exponents, fractions, and mathematical things?
And some people well, if it's numeric, I don't know if they could use exponential notation, but you could also use a free response thing and they could type in exponential notation, for example, like floating point stuff. And you just see the list, and any item that's repeated, you could just check it and then it would select all those that are identical. So, so it's not, even when I do that with a free response, if people put it in different formats or they include units, you'll see all the identical answers grouped together. You might see 100 of one answer, maybe 20 of another. You just click on the right ones and it automatically gives credit for those. And sometimes if they put in a lot of them, you'll see a lot of incorrect answers, or a lot of others. You just ignore those and only select the right ones. And if you need time to do it, you don't have to assign them as being correct now. You can go back in before you transfer the grades into Brightspace. So, because sometimes when I get 300 or 400 students in the class, there may be some other correct answers buried further down the list, and I don't want to scroll all the way through them if they use different notation or they threw in some extra words or whatever. But if it's purely numeric, it's a little bit easier. And I'm not sure how that would deal with exponential notation, for example. I haven't tried that. Most of the things
I can play around with it once I get practicing.
Yeah, it may very well work.
Is it just right or wrong, or do you give
it's pretty much right or wrong, unfortunately. Yeah. It would be nice if you could do weighted score. If one could be, say, 100% of the credit, another could be less. But
because one of my colleagues told me that he gives like 1 credit just for answering the question.
Oh, yes.
And then 2 credits for
yes. Okay.
Answer.
I misinterpreted. Yes, you can give people credit for just answering, or you can choose to give them more credit if they answer it correctly. And that's generally the best practice, because Eric Mazur suggests, for example, that you try to pick questions that are going to be challenging, those desirable difficulties that Bjork and Bjork talk about. So what you want to do, if you expect half those students to get it wrong, you don't want to mark everyone who tried it with a 0, because if they happen to, otherwise the average grade on this would be a 50, which would probably be lower than you'd want, but you still want it to be challenging. What most people do is they'll either give 1 point for any answer and 2 for a correct one, or what Eric Mazur does, and many people on our campus do, is they'll give 3 credit, 3 points for any answer and 5 points for a correct answer. So if someone gets half them correct, they'd end up with an 80. This tends to be a low stake activity. In my class, I think it's like 10 or 15% of their total grade. So, you don't want it to be something where they're getting penalized for trying and making mistakes, but it's also sort of a way of keeping attendance, because in large classes, students will sometimes disappear, but if they know they're going to be getting graded, and if they know that even if they get everything wrong, they got a 60, it's not going to bring their, in most cases, that's not going to affect their average very much. It does make sure that students get there, they try, and there's enough incentive for them to put in some serious effort. But yeah, so, and we'll talk a little bit about that actually in the next session where we talk about setting it up. Okay, so on here, this is one other question I hardly ever use. This is actually one time where I did experiment with this. This is actually a target or a heat map type question, where what you do is you just tap on the area with your mouse or your finger if you're using a smartphone where you think the correct answer is. And I'd more likely do this with letters, where you know, give the options of A, B, C, D, or E, or F. Although I wouldn't have F since there's only 5 responses there. But actually, what I would normally do in class is I would say A and B, B and C, E or F as options, or none of the above, or something similar. But I just want you to see how the heat map works. You just click on an area and that becomes your response. And it works actually fairly well. I could see it in geography or in an art class, or where people are looking at certain areas in an image, and you ask them to pick an area with a certain use of perspective or light or shadow or something similar, or on a map, you know, if it's a basic map quiz of some sort where they have to click on where a country is, or where a state is, or a province, or whatever. So yeah, just click on anything there. Don't worry about the question. That's one of an economics thing that I would not expect people to know who haven't recently taken intro micro. So what will happen is when you look at the results, it's going to show you a heat map. So those are the responses, and what you do to select the correct responses is you just draw a rectangle around the area, and I'll make sure they're both correct here, but basically what happens is you just select it. The actual correct answer is paid by consumers would be the difference here, that the upper red box, choice area A. But you just choose whatever area is correct. It has to be a rectangle, so it has to be within that range, and then it'll automatically grade that as correct. So it's a neat thing. It doesn't work so well. It's not that useful in my applications, but I could see it being useful in other disciplines. And okay, so now just some other basic facts. You could use physical clickers, and that's what some people were doing up until the pandemic. And I have a whole set of them over in a box in the corner here. But students had to buy them. A new one costs about $45 or so. A used one cost about $20 to $25. But when we use physical, the advantage of that is students would not have their phones out all the time. So that was one reason why a lot of people required physical clickers. The problem is students would forget them, the batteries would go dead, and then they'd ask for, you know, some way around that, or they want you to take their answers by hand. And in a class of 300 or 400 students, you generally don't want to do that. With a mobile device, they're not going to let their phone batteries go dead, or if they do, they'll just sit on the edge somewhere and plug it in to charge it, and they're not going to forget them. They will always be with them. One other thing that used to happen is when we had physical clickers, occasionally I would find some students sitting in the back with 2 or 3 clickers for their friends and so forth. And then I'd have to remind them that that's academic, you know, academic integrity violation, and so on. With the mobile phones, they're not going to give their phone to someone else and let them log into it, and so on. So using mobile devices actually eliminates a lot of the problems that we used to have with that. But it is still an option. As long as you're in a classroom that has a physical receiver box. We have one here, but I don't know if anyone uses them anymore. That pretty much stopped with the pandemic, because when we went remote, you have to be within a couple hundred meters of the receiver. It works with radio frequencies, but you have to be fairly close to it in order for it to work. With a mobile app, students could be anywhere in the country and connect, or anywhere in the world and connect. And when we were teaching remotely, and I had 350 students coming in on Zoom, which was another story in itself, I could still use polling software, and students just would have the app on their phone or on the computer, and they'd be able to answer questions wherever they happen to be. And the mobile version supports all the things we just did: the multiple choice, multiple select, free response, numeric response, and the target. The clickers is the clicker version is only multiple choice effectively. And software is cloud-based. All the data is stored, the grades are stored there, but it does integrate with Brightspace. So you can set it up so that once you assign the correct answers, you upload the grades into Brightspace. It will notify you if students have dropped the class or if students have not yet registered, and it will give you the option of automatically sending reminder students to register for the class if they haven't yet signed in. In other words, if they have a Brightspace account, but they haven't linked an iClicker account, which is where their student IDs would come in. And also, if students disappear, you're given the option of removing them from the iClicker gradebook. So it works really simply, basically. There's just a few buttons you click after class to upload the grades. And yeah, those are the old physical clickers. $20 to $45, students would have to buy them. They couldn't work remotely. And I did have students who had old iClickers when we were remote, who were somewhere in Pennsylvania or Long Island, and they were trying to use a physical clicker, but they were well out of range of any receiver box. You know, if you're outside of the building, generally they wouldn't work. They might work in the hallway outside, they might work in a different classroom. And in fact, one of the problems we used to have was in Lanigan, we'd sometimes have 2 or 3 classes using clickers at the same time. And the answers from all, if you happen to ask the question at the same time, you get a large number of responses coming in if it was on the same channel, and you'd end up with sometimes an extra 300 or 400 students showing up in your classes. Now, it wouldn't go into your grade book, but you'd see this long list of participants, which was a little bit distracting at times. So with the cloud version, it's not an issue. Mobile app, etc. It's free for students, at least, because the campus is paying for it. And again, the campus is paying only $4 per student per semester. And a nice thing is that that student is enrolled in 3 or 4 classes where they use clickers, it still costs only $4 for the student. So, you know, the more classes that use this, the more benefits we're getting for it. And a lot of large introductory classes in particular do tend to use clickers. I should note that I also use it in my small classes as well as large classes. Originally I was thinking of only using it in a large class, but one advantage of it, even in a small class, is if you ask students a question, unless you're going to have them turn it in, and you call on someone, you only hear from one student at a time. And you don't know if that student's the only one that understood the question, or if the student is the only one who didn't understand the issue. Here with clickers, you get to see the whole distribution of of how well students are understanding the material. And that's really useful. Even in a class of 15 students, that can be really valuable. And if they do have to pay for it, so if we stop paying for it, which is always a possibility given SUNY budget issues, it costs currently $16, well, $15.99 for 6 months for a semester, $25 for a year, or $34.99. I haven't checked prices recently. This was a couple months ago for a 2-year subscription, and I think, or $50 for 4 years. And honestly, when I was using it in an intro course, most students bought the $49.99 subscription because it was used in most economics classes, lower level and upper level classes. So they knew once they paid for it, they get to use it in multiple classes later. So those are the options. I mentioned the base station and all of that. And we talked about this already. Now, there is geofencing built in, and it's just buggy. What's supposed to happen is the geofencing is only supposed to accept responses within a very narrow distance from the base station or from the point. The problem is if students are running on the network, it picks wherever the network hotspot happens to be, what it's connected to in the network architecture. If they're coming in on a mobile device, they might be in the classroom, but it might look like they're in Pennsylvania, depending on AT&T or Verizon servers, and it's just incredibly buggy. It will rule out some students who are sitting right in front of you because the GPS is not working in the building in Lanigan, for example, and it's tying the GPS location based on to the network location, which is being which shows up for wherever the data happens to be going through based on internet connections at the time. I would strongly advise you not to use the geofencing. It's a great idea, but one problem is, students might be sitting in a bar somewhere. They might be lying in bed answering questions. On the other hand, if they're not going to be there, I'd rather have them at least trying the questions than not doing anything with the class. So, that doesn't bother me so much. If they're still logged in, if they're watching the, if they're working through the problems on their own outside of the class, that tends to be okay. And, for me, that doesn't bother me. Some people it does. One thing you could do is you get to choose whether students saw the questions on their screen or if they'd have to see it only on the screen in the classroom. They'd still be given the options, but it would just say A, B, C, D, or E, and then they'd have to make a guess. But again, they could get some correct even if they don't see what the actual questions are. So plus, when I teach classes of a few hundred, there's always some students out with COVID or this past year with the flu or with RSV and so forth. So I just have all my classes going out on Zoom anyway, so students can access it remotely as well as in person. Okay, so that's all I've got prepared. So any questions?
Short one. There's
Sure.
a session again on iClickers later today. Is that the same as this one, or does it go into more?
Yeah, the other one is actually setting it up for your class, going through all the settings
Okay.
and linking it to Brightspace.
Okay, I hope to be at that one. Can't say. for
Okay,
sure.
yeah, I figured I'd do this first so people could see what it's like, and then if you want to set it up, the next, I think it's actually coming right up, isn't it?
Is it?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Is it at 2, or I guess I can.
Yeah, the next one is getting started in iClicker, and basically what that right at 2, and so we're pretty close to that
Okay.
now. But basically, that's if you want to set it up with one of your courses, we'll go through it step by step.
But these are recorded, right? So I could go back and watch.
These are recorded, so you can go
Okay.
back. And we
Okay.
do have instructions on the SELT website too.
Yeah,
How to set it up.
Okay. All righty. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Stop the recording. Okay, did you have a question?